A re-entry and roll is a really robust way of self-rescuing. If I'm out in some dynamic conditions and I come out of my boat, a re-entry and roll is generally my go-to self-rescue. Obviously, to do a re-entry and roll, we have to have a reasonably reliable roll in the first place. So I would say that before we think about doing re-entry and rolls, let's get our rolls quite bomb-proof. Now, there are some drawbacks with a re-entry and roll, and the main one being that when I do it, I'm rolling back up into a boat that's swamped and full of water. So once I've done my re-entry and roll, I need to then think about locating into perhaps some calmer conditions where I can pump out or bail out my boat. But a re-entry and roll is certainly a really reliable, bomb-proof, dynamic self-rescue.
A re-entry and roll involves me getting my legs inside my swamped kayak, my bum on the seat and my knees up against the side before I do my standard roll. It's beyond the scope of this video to go through how we roll to start with. Hopefully, if you're watching this, you've already got a reasonably reliable roll. We're just going to look at how we can tweak it and refine it to make it work for our re-entry.
When you're learning to do your re-entry roll, first thing is to isolate the different components to it. And actually rolling without a spray deck on is the first thing you should try and master. So before you start to try and get back into the boat and look at how to do that, it's going over with your spray deck off and a boat full of water and practicing your rolls. And just feeling how that is slightly different than if you're doing a roll with the spray deck on. It's all a little bit slower, but once you get used to it, you should find that bit okay, and then you can move on to getting into the boat and getting the paddle set up to do your roll.
So as Simon's mentioned, it's well worth spending a little bit of time practicing just rolling with our spray deck off and getting that feeling of moving and rolling a fully swamped boat. The technique for the roll remains much the same, but perhaps we're just going to slow it down a little bit. So don't rush, focus on getting that blade up to the surface and think about our blade angle and that nice body movement.
So I'm going to do a re-entry and roll, so I'm going to get back in my boat and roll it the right way up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tilt the boat on its side so the cockpit is fully swamped. And what I like to do is get my blade orientated so that I know my paddle is in the right position, so that when I do get in upside down and I go for my roll, I know that the blade's the right way where I want it, so I'm going to roll up successfully. I find it really useful to do that by grabbing hold of the cockpit coaming with the paddle and my hand at the same time here. So I've got hold of the cockpit coaming, the paddle, the blade's the right way round. So when I'm in, I can reach forwards, grab the blade, just have a little feel on the surface to make sure the paddle's the right way round, and then I can commit to my roll. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to float my legs in. So get my legs most of the way into the boat here. So I'm kind of feeling towards the footrests. And then the last stage is me taking a big breath, pulling myself with this front hand so my bum's on the seat, my knees are up against the side, and then I can just do my normal roll to bring my boat back up. Okay.
So I pull myself in with my front hand, making sure I'm fully inside the boat before I feel for the blade, check my blade angle, and then go for my normal roll. Take your time, don't rush, and focus on the technique that you would normally use for your roll.
So James has gone through how to do a self-rescue in a re-entry roll through a technique that he uses. I use a slightly different technique, and this can sometimes suit some people, and James's technique can suit others. The way I like to do it is to actually have the boat the right way up, so that before you start, you can see the cockpit and you can see where it is. Get the paddle into the same position with the thumb on the inside critically. And then, when you're in this position, you can kind of float back, putting your weight onto your buoyancy aid, so that you can get your feet into the cockpit and kind of be just static and in that position. And when it comes to committing to it, you're going to reach underneath your legs with your thumb on the inside and grab the cockpit. And that's the position you're in then to pull yourself into the cockpit. Same applies with the paddle, is getting it into a setup position before you go over. And as I commit, I stare at that paddle and I look at the angle of it so that I know where it is and to visualize it when I'm upside down. When I commit, I'm going to go upside down and I'm going to keep an eye on the paddle. And then when I go to use it, I'm going to have a slight extension, and I'm also going to test it first before I use it, just to make sure it's at the right angle. So I'm going to commit to it. I'm going to put my thumb on the inside onto the cockpit rim, and then I'm going to commit myself and go into the boat.
So there's two slightly different methods of doing our re-entry and roll. As we always say with these things, it's going to be really important for you folk to go away and practice. And you might even find that you develop a slightly different technique, unique to yourself. Some people find that it helps a little to extend the blade when they roll up. You could maybe try that. Whichever method of re-entry and roll we choose to use, once we've rolled our kayak up, we're going to be in a boat that is fully swamped. Clearly this is going to be really difficult to paddle and can be quite unstable. So, very soon after rolling up, we're going to need to relocate to some calmer conditions where we can use our pump to pump out. An alternative to pumping out is once we've moved into some slightly calmer conditions, I could go for a back deck scramble. By lifting the bow up, I'm going to try and empty as much water out as I can. For me, I find a good re-entry and roll is definitely my go-to method of self-rescue, particularly in rough conditions. I do like a back deck scramble, and it does have some advantages. We're getting into a relatively empty boat. However, in bigger, bouncier seas, it can be a little unstable. I know my re-entry and roll is going to work for me in dynamic waters, so I'll commit to that. Go and have some fun practicing.